Good evening, and welcome to Access Ann Arbor. Tonight we're going to discuss a very important program called Leave a Legacy. It's the educational component of the Plan Giving Roundtable of Southeast Michigan. And Leave a Legacy is an opportunity for us to learn more about having an impact on the organizations and issues that we feel are important, and knowing how to benefit these organizations in the most advantageous way. I'm Chris Kelly. I'm with Planned Parenthood of Michigan. And with me tonight are my gift planning colleagues, Steve Moore from Wayne State's Mike Illich School of Business, and Doug Gross from Raymond James Financial Services. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here and sharing your expertise with us tonight. Let's get started. We know that plain giving is very important, whether we're working with an individual we call a donor or we call a client. In our environment today, are we hearing things from our donor clients that we feel are important or assisting or making our jobs a little tougher? Steve?
Sure, Chris. Great question. I think a lot of the uncertainty about the recent tax law changes has certainly got donors and prospective donors scratching their head. They will hear different things on the news and read different articles and not sure what aspects of the tax law changes necessarily apply to them. So a big part of what we've been doing is to reach out to people and clarify what impact we'll have and how they might be able to plan for their philanthropy in general, whether it be during their lifetime or certainly as a legacy gift from their estate plan.
Exactly. There was a lot of confusion whether or not charitable deductions were even accessible to us now, and we still generate charitable income tax deductions when we make a contribution. It's actually whether or not we can use that deduction that becomes the question. Doug, are you hearing this with your clients as far as overall planning and where they would like to make a philanthropic impact?
Absolutely. I think it's a very important issue. Certainly what you do find is that many people simply want to give to charity, and that's important to them. And whether there's a deduction or not, they've always taken advantage of it, but I think for many people they'll continue to give regardless. But I think that people that are really going to have to look at it is that giver who gives probably $2,000 to $7,000 or $8,000 a year. People that are giving $20,000, $30,000, they're going to get a deduction. They're all set. But if you're in that very nice giving range, but more modest, you've got to do some planning to make sure you're going to get some benefit. And it does lead to using some different tools and some different approaches.
Good point. What tools in our world are still very attractive to, say, a financial client that you're working with?
So for me, historically, the one I've really used a lot is Donor Advised Fund. Mm-hmm. And the Donor Advised Fund is just a wonderful tool because, you know, many people have appreciated stock positions and they want to benefit various charities. They want to give to Wayne State, they want to give to Planned Parenthood, and so it's easier to gift stock to their Donor Advised Fund and then have the Donor Advised Fund write checks to their charities. And they've avoided paying capital gains tax on the gift, and they're also, with this new change in the tax law, one of the things that's really nice is, let's say they gave $8,000 to $10,000 every year. Well, they could make a $20,000 or $30,000 gift to the Donor Advised Fund. They know they're going to get a charitable gift deduction for it, and then they might give that money each year for 3 years.
Great point. Isn't it odd that with the new tax law, capital gain liability didn't go away? But that's something that I think has always motivated some donors. Steve, are you seeing people with the university and the School of Business looking at different planning tools? Are they sticking with maybe gifts to the endowment? What are your donors looking for today?
Sure. As Doug said, we're seeing a lot of gifts of appreciated stock. Certainly when the stock market was pretty frothy, that happened a lot the year before, but we're seeing those come back. As companies are doing well, I read in the paper last week, you know, some folks had exercised stock options. And so as those assets become available to a donor, a lot of times they'll use that to satisfy their charitable intent. Not so much on the plan side, but certainly on current gifts for our donors that are age 70 and a half or more, we're beginning to see a lot of distributions out of their IRA, which helps them from satisfying their required minimum distribution. A lot of our donors have adequate income from other sources. They don't necessarily need those funds, and they do not like paying the taxes on it that sometimes can even push them up into another tax bracket. So we've tried to educate our donors and make information available on how they can direct their custodian or their trustee for their retirement plan, particularly an IRA, to make a distribution directly to the university for whatever cause. Might be for a scholarship, might be to support a program, name a space, lots of options there. But that helps them from, as you pointed out, from an income tax perspective. And so we're seeing quite a bit of interest in that now, Chris.
You know, interesting that we're talking about the charitable IRA provision, because that was confusing a few years ago. Did we have the right to do this? Didn't we have? Who was able to do it? Do we feel that our donors, our clients, are more comfortable now with the charitable IRA provision?
I think so. I really appreciate you brought it up, because I think it's probably the most effective way to make your gift, because it never even shows up on your return.
Right.
And I think that the piece that's a little tricky right now is that if somebody actually is very active charitable giving and they have, you know, they're giving to multiple organizations, oftentimes your IRA provider, it gets a little complicated to do forms for 30 different gifts. And so one of the things we're starting to recognize is that for certain clients that are very charitable, we just set up a separate IRA and give them check writing on it.
Sure.
And then they just write checks out of that IRA to make their gifts. So it sort of keeps it in that same vein that they always had, was they just wrote checks. Now obviously we've got to make sure we move money from their regular IRA, that's their investment IRA, to their charitable IRA.
Right.
But I think it's functionally works pretty well.
We just got a gift, just exactly as you described, where our donor said, I'm going to write you a check out of my IRA account. So
Yeah.
that's relatively new, and certainly if your financial firm provides that, it certainly makes it a lot easier.
Right.
It really is about the comfort level that our donor or our client has with each one of the vehicles. I think when we begin to talk about wealth transfer and charitable giving and leaving a legacy, one of the first vehicles that comes to mind for a lot of people would be a testamentary gift under their will.
Right.
Are we still seeing that today in this particular environment?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that remains a very viable gift. You know, honestly, what we really push our clients to do, though, is to try to do most of their giving from IRA accounts. And my view would be a little bit that historically the testamentary was more for older wealth, but younger people today, or most people today, have large IRA balances. While if you look at people that are in their 80s and 90s, they may not, because they were before this IRA generation. But I think that many people today that are starting to get into the older have significant IRAs, and that is the first asset that should be given to a charity, because if you give it to your children, they're going to pay taxes on it. If you give it to a charity, it's all set. There's no taxes for anybody.
Great point, Doug. Which brings me to another question. Years ago, when we would all sit and talk either with clients or donors, or even amongst ourselves as gift planners, there tended to be a certain group that hadn't done their estate planning. In fact, they didn't even have a will. What are you gentlemen seeing with donors and clients? Are people being more organized with their estate planning?
I think so. From the folks that we interact with at the business school, obviously the majority of our alumni are in the business world, so they
So they better know what they're doing.
well, they better, and a lot of them are CPAs and other financial advisors and things, so they have that kind of expertise already. I think that in general, by the time people are beginning to think about what they'll do for their legacy gifts, and not only for their family, but for other organizations they want to benefit, they're used to getting some professional advice. So we always encourage our donors to speak to their professional, their attorney, their CPA, their financial advisor, and then work with them in that relationship to find the exact fit from a program they want to support. Recently, we had a nice planned gift that was made, a testamentary one, in this particular one, where the donors had immigrated, their folks were immigrants to this country. They were first generation to attend university. They didn't speak English when they got here, and something that was important to them coming up and success in their business career were mentors. And so they made a very nice planned gift out of their estate to support mentorship so that future generations can benefit from that same mentor opportunity that they were able to enjoy.
That's fantastic. What a great story. Well, for those of our folks listening tonight that may not have been paying attention to what you've just said or to their other advisors, what happens, guys, if we were to die intestate or without a will? Who makes decisions? Who takes care of transferring our wealth to either our loved ones or our loved organizations?
Well, even if you think you don't have a will, the legislature has one for you. And so the state's intestacy laws that would apply if you die without a will. Now, that would not apply to assets that you own jointly. So if you have a joint owner, if you have some of the titling that you can put on certain accounts, so that those will pass directly to a beneficiary. So it wouldn't apply to beneficiary accounts. But assets that you own outright, such as a house or a lot of times life insurance policies, other things that people don't think about, particularly if you had them from your employer, will pass through the probate court. So those laws will take over, and most of the time, Chris, Doug, I'm sure this is your experience too, those assets are not distributed the same way that someone would want if they were making that decision.
Right.
So it's a good point that you bring up, certainly something to check into, and my belief is everyone should definitely have a will, particularly if you have minor children. That's how you appoint their guardian and conservator.
That's a great point, Steve, because a lot of times we think it's just about assets, where people with children need to name guardians, need to make sure that their children are taken care of. Doug, are you seeing anyone that comes into Raymond James that may still not have done their planning?
We do. We, I mean, you know, the way it really works is 90% of our clients have a very comprehensive plan, but 10% we talk to on a regular basis about what do we need to do to help you out here. And, you know, certainly one of the things that we do to make sure at least the assets we manage all have beneficiary elections on them, and even taxable accounts have transfer on death, which is a change from 20 years ago is that a taxable account you would not have transfer on death. And so we can cover a lot of ground, but certainly there's things your home and the childhood. You know, if you have younger children, it's really critical to have this will.
Right.
Absolutely. And oddly enough, it's not always the younger generation or even people that we think are not the mega wealthy. They need to sit down and think about these things. There are important decisions to be made. Let's see, we've talked about IRAs, we've talked about donor advised funds and donor funds in general. What if I am the type of donor that wants to make an impact, but would like to also see some additional income somehow? What's in it for me if that's the type of donor I am? What would you suggest I look into?
Well, there's several options. The two that come to mind, depending on the charity that you're working with, the organization, certainly a charitable gift annuity is a good option for that. And right now, although interest rates looks like they're going to come up here, if you are following the Fed minutes, interest rates have been so historically low that a lot of our donors are looking for ways to enhance their income. I'm sure you're seeing that as well.
Oh, sure.
So charitable gift annuities, and then another great option for that would be a charitable trust. And most of the time, we see charitable remainder trusts, so that that stream of income comes in during their lifetime. They can work with their financial advisor, like Doug, to make sure those assets are invested in such a way that that income is produced. and then the remainder assets would go to the charity of their choice. So those are two, off the top of my head, couple of opportunities.
Strong candidates.
Yeah, if you're looking for that. And, again, I think what we're talking about, Chris, overall is a comprehensive plan. You mentioned that a minute ago. Taking a look at what assets are available and really determining what the donor's wishes are. What do they need now? Is the family taken care of? And then what assets would remain to be passed on to the charity of their choice?
And you bring up a good point, Steve. Assets and selecting the right things. I think as Americans, we tend to always think, I must rise to this challenge and I'm going to write a check or I'm going to send cash. Is that always the best answer? Doug, what do you think?
We really try to get people to give appreciated securities. And, for us, Facebook has been like a godsend, and Apple and a few of these other stocks.
Yeah.
Is that people have big gains, and they may not want to own as much as they do of it because it's gone up a lot. And so it's just been very nice to say, well, let's take $20,000 of your Facebook stock and let's put it in a donor advised fund. You won't pay any taxes, and we can diversify you.
What else, Steve? What would the university look at as a suitable funding asset if you're going to be involved in, say, a charitable remainder trust?
So marketable securities, that was mentioned. Sometimes we get gifts of real estate, probably not as often. I know other charities receive those probably mainly because of the what's happened here with real estate, but that we're seeing that changing. In fact, I just read an article this week of how the shortage of single-family homes is driving up prices dramatically. As Doug mentioned, years ago, probably the home was the largest asset of anybody's portfolio, but now that has been certainly outstripped by financial assets, particularly as the change from a pension plan has gone to individuals having IRAs. So that the home certainly can still be a big asset, real estate, other things. A lot of times people will inherit assets. This is another thing that we see from time to time where somebody says, mother, father, aunt, uncle passed away and I'm receiving this property. I don't need it. What are my options to be able to use that to benefit in an organization that's near and dear to my heart?
And I would imagine from the standpoint of, say, the university, it might be more useful to the university if the donor were to use a charitable remainder trust as the vehicle,
Sure.
as opposed to handing you the keys to that property.
Yeah, it's not really an asset. We can take a look at it, but to your point, it's certainly easier if it's converted in some type of a charitable vehicle before we receive the assets.
Well, the Mike Ilitch School of Business has a beautiful brand new home, so I don't think you would necessarily need my condo. So
I don't know, though, Chris. Your condo is pretty nice. We might consider that.
well, what other things are happening? What can we share with people who are listening to us tonight as far as leaving a legacy, having an impact? If we had a donor walk into the room right now and they said they wanted to have an impact on multiple charities. We've talked about donor advised fund, which would allow that donor to have an impact on multiple charities. Is there anything else that we should be talking about that might be useful to?
I might tell a little story for a moment. So my father was a CPA in Lenawee County, and he had a client come in that was very wealthy, and she was being asked to make a significant gift to Carnegie Mellon and Henry Ford Hospital, and those both were very important to her. But her husband's company was in Adrian, and had great success in Adrian. And my father mentioned to her that did she want to make a difference to the people of Adrian, and that would be giving back to the people that helped her and her husband. And so ultimately she made a nice gift to Henry Ford and Carnegie Mellon, but she put $4 million in a foundation and started a foundation in Adrian in her name. And this was 20-some years ago, and to date, that foundation has given over $8 million to Illinois County.
Wow.
And
That's great.
every year, $500,000 just spills out of this to various charities, and there's a board of local residents. And I think that's where people really need to think about, you know, they've created wealth, where did that come from? And so, you know, you're in Ann Arbor or you're in Detroit, people have worked hard. It's a great way to give back for those who've been very successful, to think about either, you know, you don't have to set up a foundation. You can use the Ann Arbor Community Foundation, and you can create a dedicated account and say, I'd like this to give money in perpetuity, and they can do that for you.
Great point.
That is excellent.
Yeah, that's kind of our tagline, making a difference in the lives that follow, and so that's a great example of that. And I think that's good planning. You know, certainly an instrument that for the right donor can be helpful. Some of the other things that we're seeing, to your question, Chris, gifts of life insurance. Back in the Stone Ages, when I was a paper boy, we used to, believe it or not, you could get your subscription, just a regular subscription, or you could get that with a little insurance policy. People paid on those weekly, and you know, you collected for the newspaper. And so over the years, I've seen people realize that there's some insurance policies laying around in the drawer. They don't intend to use them. They haven't really even thought about them in years. Maybe mother or father purchased them for them early in life. And so that's another opportunity, either gifts outright of life insurance or using that to leverage up a gift so that over time the premiums that you pay will result in a significant gift.
Terrific.
To name a wing at the hospital, or
Oh, yeah.
name a space in a new building, any of those types of things.
Well, gentlemen, I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention another type of planning, and that's blended giving, where we can lock some of these different vehicles together to have an even stronger impact, both a current gift today as well as something that would generate the disposable income. How is blended giving affecting your donors and your clients?
Good question, Chris. It's I think it does a disservice to the donor if you don't talk about that. A lot of times they're setting up an estate gift or charitable gift annuity or things like that, and they don't have the opportunity to experience the joy that comes from seeing the impact of those dollars during their lifetime. So almost all of the time, if somebody's considering a legacy gift, we'll talk about the opportunity to maybe carve out some dollars during their lifetime to support a scholarship or a program. One of the joys of my job is you get to talk to alumni literally all over the U.S., and they tell you about a specific professor or a program or a organization that really impacted them when they were on campus. And so they might have an estate gift that will support that organization, but they can begin to make a cash gift during a lifetime and experience. They'll hear from students, they'll have a chance to meet them, they'll get an impact report on the result of their giving, things like that. And so most of the time, Chris, that ends up being a wonderful opportunity for donors to experience that, what sometimes their families do, but they don't because they're not here to enjoy that.
Well, and you mentioned insurance. Insurance can also be a wonderful opportunity, coupled with plan giving vehicles, to make that impact today and in the future. We're getting a little short on time, so why don't we do this, gentlemen? What parting thoughts would you want to share with anyone listening to us tonight as far as leaving a legacy and having an impact? Who should they talk to, and what kind of questions should they be asking? Steve?
I would encourage them to talk to their advisors. If they are particularly interested in a local nonprofit organization, often they'll have a gift officer that they can also talk to and see what opportunities there. But I I'd send them in to Doug and say, have him look at your situation, decide what assets are important and how you want to maximize the benefit of those, either during your lifetime or certainly as a legacy gift.
Great. Doug, when everybody comes banging on your door, what would you like to share with them?
Well, I think that what's really important is to, as you say, have a plan to make it all work. And so you look at your typical person, they have life insurance, a husband and wife might each have IRAs, they have taxable accounts. So you could have gifts coming from 5 to 7 or more accounts. And unless you actually put it all together, lay out who the beneficiaries are, you may not realize how much money it all is, where it's all going. And so you sort of need to actually do that and then have some process to regularly assess that. Accounts grow, maybe this account grew a lot, and you should be looking again and saying, oh, well, you know, what's really happening today? So I think it's something that should be looked at on a regular basis, and that a lot of the time you can do that meeting with an advisor, and you can change beneficiary elections, and you don't even have to go meet with your attorney. I think and I think meeting with an attorney obviously is very important and makes a lot of sense, but to change your beneficiary designations or update those, it is not necessary oftentimes to meet with an attorney to do that.
So in essence, guys, would we say that to really have an impact, to leave a legacy, both financial and perhaps some extra lessons to the next generations of what we thought was important and why maybe they should investigate, it's all in the planning. Understanding what you've acquired, celebrating that you've had a great life, and sharing some blessings with other people and other organizations. Well, what we've shared tonight is just the tip of the iceberg of what one can do when they plan and they sit with experts and talk about what they'd like to see happen. If you're a charitable organization and would like to learn more, Leave a Legacy has a speakers bureau where you can have someone come in to talk to your organization, to your board, your committees, or even do a donor seminar to talk about some of these opportunities and how to have an impact. For individuals or organizations, check out our website with the Plan Giving Roundtable of Southeast Michigan. Our contact information is there, our web address is on there, and also some of the programs and opportunities to learn a lot more about leaving a legacy and having an impact. Gentlemen, thanks again for sharing your expertise and helping me leave a legacy.
Thanks, Chris.